Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this morning's presentations on the 12 days of performance management. Presenting today, we have the three most passionate people I've ever met about performance management in Lawson and in general. And with that, I give you Shannell, Janna, Matt.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be here today to give you our best tips and tricks for performance management. The three of us have all been involved in implementations and have a lot of lessons learned and hints to pass on to you. So we're going to kind of use the 12 days of Christmas as our format for talking through 12 points that are really important to remember when implementing performance management. We'll give you some insight into a couple pieces of newer functionality that's coming out in a newer version. Some of you may or may not be in the middle of upgrading to. We'll have a few minutes hopefully to take some questions, and we'll let you know about the rest of the HCM webinars today. So on the first day of implementation, one thing to keep in mind is that there is a way rating scales should be ordered. You would think, especially looking at my little graphic in the bottom, that whatever the top number is your best score. But the way the system's designed is 1 always needs to be the worst score. And if you've got a 3, 4, or 5-point scale, you want that to be your top rating. And when that comes into play is when you're using the overall rating functionality that sums up your ratings and tries to create an overall rating. It will not work if your scale is not oriented this way. So keep that in mind. On the second day, one thing that Shannell has worked on.
Yes, that you can have 2 sets of ratings displayed as the manager completes their appraisal. So if you're using the self-appraisal functionality of the system, you can have the employee and rate themselves, and their evaluation will look like this, where all they see are their own. You have your ratings there and your criteria there to assess. But when the manager sees it, they'll see 2 sets. They'll see what the employee rated themselves on, as well as how they're rating the employee, which is really helpful for them as they go through the appraisal process. One thing to note here, though, is that the self-appraisal must be finalized in order for this to be seen on the manager appraisal.
And this is done through Configuration Console.
Yes, this is done through Configuration Console of that form.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me.
Oops.
So, third point to remember. Matt, you were going to talk to us a little bit about the 3 process flows that are involved.
So right now for performance management, there are 3 main process flows. You've got your appraisal, approval, and acknowledgement. You've also got your rater request forms. Now, as with almost everything that you've got in the entire GHR system, you can go in and do some things to these process flows if you need it to route a slightly different way. You can also add different ones on there as well. If you want them to always route to a certain in basket or a certain inbox, you always want to have somebody acknowledging this. You can always assign them those roles, or you can modify those flows if you need to as well. But out of the box, you've got a couple of them that are available for people and kind of are used almost all the time. But you do have those potentials for making some changes on them. Your approval form and your manager approval form or flows are out there. They're delivered and they do work well out of the box. We can just tweak them a little bit if we need to. Can go to the next slide there as well. So you can see that we're able to allow different appraisals on this and different ratings. And again, like we're saying, with the process flows and with Configuration Console, we can modify it so that certain people can see certain portions of it and suppress pieces that they shouldn't see yet. So those 2 tools put together definitely can help you out with that. Can bounce the neck, thanks you. And we also have the option of how these are going to actually be triggered when it comes down to when should it progress to the next step or when should these flows kick off. There are a couple triggers that are built into the system just on those drop-down boxes. You can definitely use those just as is, and it will kick off the flows at the proper time.
Excellent, thank you. So point number 4. There are 4 different types of criteria response. And the rating scale is something you probably would think of for a lot of your appraisal sections where you want somebody to rate how they did on a goal or a competency, but you can also put in yes/no checkboxes. You can put in multiple choice answers for people to select to, or you can just request a long text response. So just showing you a little bit, the appraisal criteria is the smallest piece that you would build first. So it might be one particular question. And then for each question, you have a separate criteria that you then group together to create a criteria group. And then you're not done yet. You have to then create an appraisal form section that pulls in that criteria group, and that gives you a few other options. So one kind of newer thing I learned in my latest implementation was, I don't have to create a separate criteria for comments. The form section actually allows you to say whether or not, I got ahead of myself. So wait, there's more. No separate comments for criteria needed. You can simply check this checkbox down here that says, yes, I'd like to include comments for each criteria. And you can say whether or not those comments need to be required. And then even beyond that, you can say, if somebody gives something a certain rating level, I would like to require comments for that. And so you can actually say, just the 2 lower ratings are the ones I really want to make sure that I get responses to, so we understand why somebody's being rated so low on this particular aspect. So there's a lot of really nice variable functionality there to get it to just do exactly what you want it to do. A final caveat, so you don't end up like this. There are a number of changes. Some changes that you make to your appraisal form are simply checking a checkbox or changing a title or something. There are some changes that are going to require you to completely deconstruct the appraisal and drill back down to get to that section to make that change, and then you have to rebuild the form. So you can only do this if there are no appraisals generated off of your appraisal form. So if you've got a change to your form, you're going to have to delete all the appraisals you generated, remove that section from the appraisal form, make the changes to the section that you need to make, and then re-add it to the appraisal form and regenerate all the appraisals. So keep that in mind as you're getting to a point of needing to generate them or not. Really make sure that you've got it in the final format you want.
And along those same lines, Janna, when talking about the criteria, it's also important to remember that if you're multiple criteria to display in a criteria group, that you have to put them in the right order or the order of display when you're creating them. If you have 4 different criteria that you want displayed in that order in a group, you just have to make sure that you put it in that order into the system, because the system will automatically order those according to how you create them.
Yeah, there's a random number assigned to each criteria as you create them.
Yes.
So if all of a sudden your second criteria is wrong and you need to create a new one and you can't reuse it for some reason, you're going to have to create all 4 of them again to get them in the right order. So, excellent point.
Unfortunately, there aren't any ways to override that specific piece, so you do have to be very careful with it. A lot of other forms you're able to go through and say sort by short description or long description. This, you're unfortunately not able to do that. You're just locked into it.
Yep. All right. So on to point number 5. There are 5 million forms you can configure, especially when it comes to goals. So there's a couple, pieces of background and configurations. In some cases, you just have a page. In the later versions, they're starting to wrap these composite forms around the pages to give you additional tabs and additional action menu bars across the top. And then in some cases, you have a relevant list that also needs to be similarly configured. What we were finding in the latest go-round was that there are different pages for almost every view. You think, it looks the same, but it's really called something different. So you're going to have to go through and make the same configuration changes in each and every form to have it look the same throughout the appraisal process. So don't assume, make sure to test thoroughly what your forms are. So here's an example of just a single form. Create note. When you go to create note, there's just the one form. And what we were doing most recently was hiding the public checkbox and also defaulting that it was checked, because we wanted to make sure that both the manager and the employee could always see each other's notes and that one of them didn't mistakenly uncheck or purposely uncheck the public checkbox. There is a separate form for once you've created the note and you're going to update the note. So have to do the same couple of configuration changes to that. And we're going to get into in a little bit. Shannell did some fantastic configuration changes to the note section, and it's really going to be fun to take a look at those. So here's an example of a composite form wrapped around. This form that you see, the Details tab, is wrapped around the Create Goal screen. Now, if you're on an older version, you're still just going to have a Create Goal screen when you either request a goal as an employee, or you suggest a goal as a manager, or you create a goal. Just went through an upgrade recently where all these new forms popped out with the composite. So you have more opportunity to add onto things. This is the delivered form, and the implementation I was doing recently didn't want to use the expected results, didn't want to use all these fields in here. And so you can see to the side of it is the final configured form that has the fields hidden that aren't in use. As well as across the top, we added the save and new functionality, because in the previous version, once you save the goal, it would just kind of disappear and you could click suggest or request a goal and a new form would open. With this, because of the change in the form structure, it's now just kind of hanging out there and you have to close the form and then click save and request. So we found, we can add save and new as an action bar item, and it just automatically pops up in the next form if you're continuing to put goals in. Finally, here's an example on the other side, the manager side, where they're creating a goal. And again, here's the delivered form, and then there's some stuff that's been hidden. There are two lists that are related to goals if you have the future goals section in your appraisal. And so we similarly wanted to hide the weight field, for example, wasn't being used. So we wanted to make sure we removed that from the list so that everything was clean and made sense. And here's an example of the 5 million forms there are. So for requesting a new goal, a lot of you are on a version that has 3 forms. There's the request new goal form that just updates the rich client view. If you're using employee space, you want to do the request new goal form for browser. And if you're using the tablet or the smartphone, you want to use request new goal form for tablet. If you upgrade to some updates and get into these newer composite form combinations, the request new goal form and request new goal form for browser have condensed to a goal update EE form. And the LRC pending goals EE form has the tabs that wrap around it. And you still have the request new goal form for tablet. Similar on the manager side, you've got 3 forms that have condensed. The create goal and create goal for browser are now combined in the goal update admin form. The tablet form still remains, but you have this newer composite form pending goals admin form that has those tabs and that additional action bar that you can put actions onto. So little heads up, depending on what versions you're on. And unfortunately, if you've already done a lot of this work and you're upgrading, you may have to redo a lot of your work in the new forms. And then here's just another example, like how many more goal forms are there? So depending on if it's in draft status versus needs approval versus active, and you're looking at it through the admin window or the employee window or the manager window, you have all these various forms and composite forms now to be on top of and make the same set of changes to over and over again so that your look and feel is consistent.
If it does work out well, though, the good thing about the composite forms is, in theory, you only have to make a change to a list once because it will be invoked several places.
Yes.
In practice, you do have to make sure that it's actually invoking that composite form at that point.
Correct. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Okay, our 6th point. This was your Shannell. There are 6 ways to personalize your consolidated appraisal.
Yes. So at my company, we have very specific, I'm not going to say needs, but requests of how we want the performance appraisal to look. So I started diving into the configuration console and found that there are ways, even though they're kind of hidden, you got to find them, there are ways to make that consolidated appraisal look the way you want it to look and have the information in it that you want it to have. And so one that we really wanted to accomplish and that we were able to accomplish is to make that acknowledgement part of the consolidated appraisal say exactly what the employee is acknowledging, so that when we print this off and we need to take it to it's documentation for anything, we would have the language there that we want to have. And so we configured that part of the appraisal to actually display what the employee acknowledgement is, and then below it has the name of the person who acknowledged any comments that they had, and then the date and time that they acknowledged it, which makes it a really useful piece of documentation and something that our employees were used to seeing. Secondly, we also edited the attachments field or section of the Consolidated Appraisal. Part of our process is to attach a job description. It's a requirement for us that every employee reviews their job description during the appraisal process, and we wanted to make sure that we had a way to document that that actually occurred. So our managers go through and attach their PDFs of the job description to the appraisals. And we updated the attachment section on the consolidated form to show that the attachment should be a job description or any other document that they chose to attach to the performance appraisal. So that's what that shows here.
Perfect.
And then that overall rating section that has the graph that appears to be nice and it looks like it can be useful, but it really isn't very useful for us. For us, we've made a change from number ratings into descriptors. And so that graph is just uneditable. It shows it as it is in numbers, and we didn't want our employees to be confused. So we went into that section of the Consolidated Appraisal, which is still another form. So all these different sections are different forms in Configuration Console. So we found this section and we removed the graph, and we just really cleaned it up a lot so it's easy to see what is the rating and then what is the comment that you want everyone to see.
I was particularly excited to see this because for years in 342 you couldn't really do anything to the Consolidated Appraisal, so we just didn't use this section, and then we had to do this quirky historic section to upload an overall rating so it would show in the page. It was like, so much better.
Yes.
Number 4.
All right, fourth one. So this was pretty cool. We found this, yet another form, this section in Configuration Console, because we wanted to personalize the headers for each of the fields. So we didn't want it to just say the delivered field names on the appraisal. We wanted it to be something more familiar to the employee when they printed this out and looked at it. So on this one, we chose to, add the information that we wanted to add to it and display, take away the information we didn't want displayed to the employees in that section, and then rename the headers.
Great. Number 5.
Number 5, competencies. So the problem that we had here was that the title, the header part and the title of the criteria that was being evaluated was never what we wanted it to say. It was the clunky short description, which never has enough characters to actually say what you wanted to say, and it just didn't look nice and appear nice. You would need like some kind of glossary to match up what was displayed here and then what we really wanted to say. So we were able to find this form to edit that criteria section to display the description section of competency, not the short description. So we did that in the Configuration Console as well.
Perfect.
And then we also edited so that it shows the manager rating and the employee self-rating, and if there were comments, it would show both sets of comments there too.
Excellent. And then for the 6th one, I actually broke this down as 6.1, 6.2. So depending on which section you're using, in one of the appraisals, we have 3 phases at the current place I've been implementing. The first one, we use the future goal section. So again, I mentioned earlier, we're not using the weight. So we had to go in, find this section, which was the active goals manager summary list, and hide, this was a list, and hide the weight column from it. What I'm going to figure out, I was hoping to have this done by this presentation, but we're getting this done this month, is now in the next phase, we're using the goals section. And again, the weight is showing up on the Consolidated Appraisal. And so we're going to figure out what section this is and hide that so it doesn't show anymore. So there's some great Consolidated Appraisal, excuse me. So 7, we have 7 types of notes because Shannell did a bang-up job customizing the notes section
Yes.
at her
Thank you.
organization. Yeah.
So we saw the notes section as something that was a really useful tool of communication between the employee and the manager. We also saw it as a useful tool during the performance appraisal process as a reminder of all the events that happened during a year without having to go to a file cabinet or go through your emails or a shared drive folder. We were really trying to make this a tool that they thought was efficient and useful for them. So we decided to really guide the use of the note into a direction that we thought was going to be very meaningful to the employee and the manager. So we've defined in Configuration Console on those note forms that Janna already talked about, these Boolean fields that define what type of note is being created. And then depending on the type of note that is checked by both the employee or the manager, different fields will display underneath. So if you want to go to the next one, if they were to check check-in meeting, because they're Boolean fields, I can control what is displayed on the rest of the form based on those conditions. So in a check-in meeting, I've added a meeting date and then items for discussion so they can create an agenda for that check-in meeting and then a summary of performance underneath. So, and this will then be shared with the employee because it's public and the manager. Initial promotion transfer evaluation is something we were also looking to use this for. We had a really bulky evaluation and we said, how can we make this simple? So we said, let's use a note. So this is what it would look like. The difference here is that you have a field that says extend the initial evaluation period. So that allows the manager to identify whether this person needs longer on their evaluation time. And again, the fields below have also changed with the instructions on what to put in each of those fields. Supervision cleans it up, is modified, all the other fields go away. Now you have a supervision meeting date, and then the header for the notes field turns to enter notes for supervision meeting discussion. So there's one field on here that has to be consistent throughout all of these, and that's the one that starts. That's that required notes field. So that field is actually the same on all of these different types of notes. There's just different instructions on what we're expecting to see in that box.
Really fun.
It is really fun. And then achievements, awards, and recognition is really just that reminder, because managers don't always know what's going on with the employee during the year. And this is a good way for the employees to let them know. And then training provided is another one, another good way for managers to record what's going on with that employee throughout the year without having to remember when they're writing the evaluation, well, did I give this person training on this? I know we talked about it, but did we really do it? So this is a way for them to document that. Coaching. I know that there's a coaching module in employee relations. We're not fully using that at this point, so I thought, well, let's use notes because eventually it's going to go there anyway. So that is now a type of note that we have for managers to create coachings for before they enter the the discipline process. And then lastly, a miscellaneous, because you need to have a miscellaneous out there in case something that they want to put in there just doesn't meet any of those other definitions that we gave them. So those are our 7 types of notes that are available to our supervisors.
And I'm going to be a little bit of a wet blanket on this one, because as I always say whenever we're doing an implementation, if you are using notes, just always make sure that you're being very cautious about them, because all of this is discoverable.
Absolutely.
So if you don't trust your managers to write appropriate things in notes, or you've got a manager who could put something in that could put you in some sort of legal problems, it's discoverable. You have to be very careful with them.
Yes.
So just always remember that with anything about a note.
Absolutely.
We've seen some people get stung by that before, so.
That's another reason why we chose to give reasons.
Exactly, exactly. So but use with caution.
Yes.
So.
Absolutely. Good deal. Okay, so 8th point to remember. Matt, you were going to talk a little bit about the 8 appraisal texts that come delivered.
Right. So as the slide says, we do definitely have 8 of these that are kind of out of the box, ready to go for you. The part that is not out of the box and you are able to configure is what the note or what that text will actually say. The nice thing is in later versions of it, again, we're not going to talk about the bad old days of 342 or anything like that, but now you're actually able to put these texts in as as rich text. So you can actually have formatting on them. You can bold certain portions of it, italicize it, put colors in. You can put, bullets in, whatever you would need to. They are configurable in that regard. You're able to put whatever you would like to on those and really make things stand out the way you want. So with those 8, we can go forward on that. You can also go through and change how they're going to display on the page itself. So we're able to invoke what that little header is going to be. Whatever we put on that, when we defined what the text was, is going to appear right on that form. So you definitely can put whatever you'd like on there. Add descriptors, tell people what they're supposed to be doing in this certain phase. It's all fair game for you at that point.
And this shows on the home page of the appraisal. So you have to kind of click into the appraisal to get the section where these texts, are going to show.
Right, it's like the context header or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. So number 9 email triggers. Matt, you were going to walk us through these a little bit as well.
Yep. So just like with those labels and what we can do with some of those, we can define all of these email templates. We can invoke different templates for different portions. We can turn on whether or not emails are being sent automatically on them. You've got that field to not only say whether or not it's going to invoke this email immediately, or if you're going to have an email sitting out there for it, which you can kick off manually. You've got that ability to do that. If you do automatic, the thing that you have to watch out for is whenever that criteria is met, it is going to send that email right away. So what you can see on this screen is we might have an email rule saying that we're not going to send an email, but we did define the template. So we can still have the template sitting out there and invoke that email manually later on, but we don't want to have it send as soon as we get to that stage.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind, as you're saying that, I was thinking our little crying face earlier. If you have to delete and recreate all your appraisals and you had this triggered, turn it off. If you don't want the email to go out to everybody again when you create those appraisals. And then a little bit more, Matt, you were talking about the rich text formatting that you now have the ability to do, and this was just kind of highlighting some of the things that you can do in your email templates now with rich text formatting. Yep,
you can absolutely do pretty much anything that you want to on those on the email templates. You've got a lot of abilities, like I say, with the bolding of text, make things italicized, etc. The nice thing is they've also built in some things that are very handy for when you're building the text out on this. They now have a spelling dictionary in there. There's actually ways in later versions as well to modify that spelling dictionary. So if you have a very complex organization name and it keeps on showing up that this is incorrect, it gets really annoying after a while. But you can now modify the spelling dictionaries to allow that. Again, you can do bullets, you can do all of that special text, special formatting of the text. But there is one limitation on it, and that is there are very few delivered variables that you can use on the form. So it's going to serve you up with, I want to say it's probably around like a dozen or a couple dozen variables that you can invoke. And you are unfortunately locked into those. There's no way to invoke a separate variable. If you were producing it as a document, you're able to modify the merge document later on. But for the email templates, you are locked into those variables.
So one thing that's been really helpful, the couple places I've implemented, is this ability to put links into your email templates. So say you generate the appraisals, you send an email to the employee or the manager or both, and you can put a link right back into the system there in the email, so they don't have to go out to the internet, find the link to the performance appraisal and get into it. They can just click right on the link in the email. It takes them right there. Similarly, if you have notes or cheat sheets, instruction guides that you've posted out on your SharePoint site, you could put a link to those directly, so people seem to work out of email a lot more. It's kind of the default, and they can just click on that. You can also put in, if you know a little bit of HTML code, you can put in a link that will let you create an email immediately. So you have a question, you want to send an email to HR, you can just click on the link and it shoots, creates the email for you. So a lot of really nice functionality within these email templates to just give your staff exactly what they need to take the next step and move forward in the process.
Right. Anything you can do in a template is really key. You want to keep that message the same across the organization, and the templates are going to be the best way for you to do that.
Number 10, there are 10 appraisal form sections. And let's see, Shannell, did you want to take us through these a little bit?
Sure.
Actually, let me talk, we'll share these a little bit,
Yeah.
because some of these, we've actually never had an appraisal use some of these sections, so we mocked them up just to
Right.
get a sense of them. So top of the list when you are creating your appraisal sections is completed activities. If you are using activities in your organization, you want those to pull into your appraisal, this is the section that you would want. Note that the activities must be completed to show. Given the name, I had an activity, I was like, why isn't it showing? Oh, it's not completed. So this is just kind of a display format here. Criteria, I also talked about a little bit earlier, how you build each piece of the criteria, create a criteria group, and then pull that in to an appraisal section. And so here's just kind of how that looks both in the consolidated appraisal. This is a couple pieces of criteria here with some responses, and then on the web-based form, that's kind of how that looks as well. Future goals, this is a section we just used recently. It enables you to do goal setting through your appraisal, and there's functionality through that for the employee to suggest a goal and send it, or request a goal and send it to the manager. A note that if they forget to submit it to their manager for approval, when the manager goes into this section, they're not going to see anything. So you may get a few calls. We tried to put notes all over the place for the employees. You must submit before finalizing your appraisal. People don't read. People are in a rush. So inevitably, we got some phone calls. Hey, my employee said he put his goals in, but I'm not seeing them. Well, we look and see they're still in draft. They're not submitted yet. So once they're submitted, then the manager has the functionality through their part of the form to approve those goals and make them active. We put some notes in the consolidated appraisal because if the goal is not active, it doesn't pull into the consolidated appraisal. So they might be seeing it in the system, but then they generate the consolidated appraisal and they say, well, where'd my goals go? Right. So we tried to give them some pointers. Hey, if you're not seeing the goals here, you can also go to manage goals where you could just see everything. Regular goals section, are you using this at all?
We are.
Okay.
We are definitely using this. So with the regular goals, the one thing I want to make sure everybody knows is that you have to make sure that the goal is active before you create your appraisal. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well.
Tell it now, tell it often.
But we're going to say it again because it's so important. So with this, the evaluate goals is just going to pull in all the goals that are currently active for that employee and display them for you to rate. You must rate this section for your appraisal to be complete. I've gotten so many calls.
You won't be able to finalize.
You cannot finalize your status. If you have your status percentage displayed, it will not reach 100% until you rate every goal that's listed in this section. And again, you can configure this to show what you want it to show. I love the instructions that are displayed on the list because users get to this point and they're not sure what to do. I've had users click on the self-rating column header thinking that that's what I'm supposed to do. And so it's really helpful to give them those instructions there.
And one thing that makes me think of, I think we both did this in our appraisals, is this list as delivered does not allow you to select the ratings there. You have to click into the goal, but there are modifications you can do through Configuration Console so that you can just select a progress or a rating right on the list and not have to go all the way in. Header. This is a standard section. Most everybody will have a header that allows you to put in your mission, your vision if you have one, and then any instructions. The instructions will pull into the consolidated appraisal, so just have a sense of that as you're doing them. And this was a view from employee and manager space, kind of how it looks in the appraisal. Planned activities. Again, none of us have ever had anybody use this, but similar to the future goals section, this is a section that allows your employees and managers to request activities and approve activities that might be relevant to a goal or some corporate initiative that you had for them. So there's the employee requesting, and then the manager assigns is the lingo. Resource, there's a number of checkboxes for the resource section. This again just pulls into your consolidated appraisal. So that's kind of a view of a consolidated appraisal. Again, Shannell had the one where she had updated all the labels to match their wording exactly. And based on what you check is what shows. Pretty straightforward. And finally, the summary section.
Yep. And we've talked about this already
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Clean it up, make it look nice. Deliver it again. It has the graph, which could be useful for your organization. So I'm not saying everyone has to get rid of it, but for us, the descriptors don't work with the graph as
Where I've seen the graph, I don't know about you, Matt, but where I've seen the graph actually makes sense was where you had multiple raters and there was like
Yes.
a different
Right.
bar for each rater.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it definitely would work in that scenario, but a lot of times you're exactly right. If there's one piece of the rating that is not included, that graph just kind of, its usefulness goes away
Yeah,
almost
it does.
immediately. So,
It becomes clutter.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, third party.
Yes. So the third party as delivered is meant for you to load in scores from another performance evaluation system that you might be using. We don't do that. We don't have a third party vendor or any other source of evaluation scores. So we decided to repurpose this form to make it a looking ahead form for our employees because we really wanted our appraisal to be very developmental. So this section allows employees to be aware of what their strengths are, what their manager sees as their strengths, and then where their manager wants them to be in the future. What direction should they go in? So we completely blew up the form, took away everything that was on there, and added user fields to create what you see here for the directions and then the comments section as well. One thing I did learn though when I did that is that even though we're not using a score, the system requires a score for this section because that's the functionality, that's the delivered functionality. And so in order for the appraisals to reach 100% and be finalized, I have to load in some dummy score on all the appraisals just for this section.
And there's kind of a similar workaround if you're not using weights. The system does require a weight for each goal. And so you can default a weight and it doesn't have to equal 100%. So you can default like 1% for each weight, for each goal, or 10%. But you will not be able to close out your appraisal form without those weights. You'll get error messages. Final one here, adding a custom notes section.
Yeah, so this is something else that we did. Notes, I guess, is my thing. So one of the requests that we had was, instead of having to click around and try to find everything that we need to really evaluate and appraise the employee's performance throughout the year, can we make everything in one spot? And so I added a panel through Configuration Console to the performance appraisal to display the notes for that employee. So when managers go in to begin their appraisals, the first tab they see is a listing of the notes for that employee. So they can refresh their memories or even go back as they're going through and completing the appraisal to see, okay, well, what were those achievements, which is another really useful purpose of those different note types, those 7 note types, because then they can search for, well, what coachings did we have? What are my supervision notes? What were the achievements and awards that this employee received during a year? They can see that easily while they're completing the appraisal.
Oh, and I got back to this slide because I want to explain why that is so helpful. The only other way to get to notes through the appraisal is if you get back to this home page and you've got a link here to take notes, and nobody remembers this, and so it's so much more helpful to pull as much as you can into the appraisal form, whether it's the employee's rating, so they don't, like similarly, if you don't pull the employee's rating in, the managers have to go to the self-appraisal link to pull up the employee's responses to see that and have 2 windows open and go, or toggle back and forth. And so what we found over the years is the more data points that you can pull forward into the actual view, the easier it is for your managers and employees to get through the whole appraisal process.
Right. The last thing you want to do is make a performance appraisal even more difficult for a manager or employee. You need it to be easy. You need it to be something that's kind of self-evident so they don't need a lot of guidance for it. It doesn't matter if you've got the world's most trained manager. It's still a process that is tough for some people to go through.
Yes. Excellent. So, as we mentioned earlier, our last two tips, 11 and 12, are about auditing. Audit your goals. As Shannell mentioned earlier, if the goals are not active when you create the appraisal, they will not pull in. They will not pull in afterwards, even if somebody goes back and activates them once you've created the appraisal. The old version used to do that. So, don't know what constraint they put in that prevented that. But it is all about the status here. Those in draft submitted will not pull in once they're approved accepted. Completed goals, you have to be careful with the completion dates too. When you're defining your appraisal form, you're defining a review period. If both the start and the completion dates for those goals don't fall within that, then the goal will disappear. And so keep that in mind. And then deleted goals, I found they used to drop out of the appraisal. If it was a goal that was not relevant anymore and they'd forgotten to get rid of it before you created appraisals, it may stick around now, but Shannell, you were mentioning if you inactivate it, you definitely notice that drops out.
Yes, you can inactivate them at that point. And even if it's attached to an appraisal, you can't delete them.
Right.
But you can inactivate it at that point too.
And then Shannell had this experience recently.
Yes.
Where you want to audit your competencies.
Absolutely. So for us, we had some competencies that were attached at the job level that fed on through, and there were a couple that were incorrect. So we have leadership competencies. There's a leadership for self and a leadership for leading people. Well, people who were leading people didn't get leading people. So when I changed it on the job level, it didn't go all the way down into the appraisal. So what we discovered is that we actually had to delete all of those appraisals and recreate them so that the right competencies would then display into the appraisal.
Excellent. And one other thing I wanted to mention back about auditing your goals, when you define your appraisal form, you define the type of goal that will pull into the appraisal. So maybe you have developmental goals that aren't relevant to performance appraisals, but you're using the learning and development section to kind of keep track of that. We ran into issues with people thinking, oh, business development, I need to select developmental as the type of goal, and really it was a performance goal. Goal didn't pull in. You also can't just change the type of the goal once you've saved the goal. So we were having to delete the goal, recreate it as a performance goal, delete the appraisal, recreate the appraisal to pull it in. Another thing to keep in mind if you have multiple types of goals, to not just audit the status, but also the type, and make sure those are lining up for how your appraisal is defined. So then as a final bonus, Matt reminded us.
Yes. Last thing I guess would be audit your supervisory structure. It sounds kind of crazy. You would think that this would just be innate. Everybody would know what their supervisory structure looks like. That might be true, but at the same time, you really need to run a little bit of an audit for yourself to make sure that what you believe is happening in the system is actually happening in the system. The number of times we've looked at people's supervisory structures and done that after even a few months of being live on the system, their supervisory structure could get out of sync, basically, with reality, just by somebody choosing the wrong code on a position, or somebody vacated, or they added a new supervisory structure or a new supervisory responsibility to somebody. The supervisory structure can get out of whack, and so you just need to check it out, especially around performance time, just to make sure that you're getting the right people queued up for that employee. Nothing worse than sending an evaluation to the wrong manager for an approval.
And getting a million phone calls. This person doesn't report to me anymore. Why am I seeing this?
Right. There's a couple rebuild jobs you can do as well, just to make sure it pushes through. But you just want to check it out and make sure it's reality matches the system. So.
Absolutely. Excellent. So those are our top tips and tricks for implementing performance management, but we wanted to give you a heads up on some newer functionality that's come out in the last year that we thought was pretty fun. So next steps, as Matt talked about, those appraisal texts are helpful, but they only display on that home page, which people aren't in a lot. And so now they've come forward with next step instructions that are a column in that list that you first see as either an employee or a manager when you get into review performance. So got a couple clients really excited about taking advantage of this, because as much as you email them and text them and put notes up in the kitchen about what they need to be doing now. Nothing's like in context instructions. So going to be really fun to implement that a couple places. And then as Matt was talking earlier, there's this rich text formatting that's being pushed out to more and more fields. So it's been in the appraisal email templates for a little while now, but we're starting to see it in the goal description field, for example. So managers and employees can put bullets, can highlight, can color the text, do whatever they want to make it pretty. And this carries through employee manager and generalist space, all these new richer text fields. It's funny, this is from Rich Client, and it scared me a little bit when I thought, are we really giving employees the ability to put links and all sorts of crazy stuff in it? And then I looked, oh good, they cut it down to just the more normal stuff through employee and manager space. So that's it for what we had prepared, but if there are questions coming through, we're happy to take them in the few minutes we have left.
Absolutely. So first of all, we've gotten a couple of comments on the audio, and we understand there were some intermittent issues. My understanding is that a lot of this was in the transmission and that the recording should be fine. So hopefully when you get that link, anything you missed, you can go back. And again, we do our best to make sure these go smoothly. So apologies for any inconvenience there. I do have a question around, I'm just going to read it because part comment, part question. The appraisal process is so onerous. There seems to be a multitude of steps going back and forth between employee and manager, and each step to move it forward. Our leaders are really struggling. Has any client you've worked with found ways to make this a more streamlined process?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Matt, you spoke to this earlier. There are delivered flows that you can modify. So for some of the approval processes, maybe you don't want to use it. The first form in our 3-part process, we're not even using the acknowledgement process. We're not telling employees exist. We just have the managers finalize it, and then they're acknowledging en masse on the back end to avoid that whole back and forth. If you don't need approvals, then you select it so it just goes straight to the employee. I don't know. Some of the things we've showed you today will hopefully help mitigate some of the steps by having the information displayed more readily for employees. Is there anything else you've seen in other clients?
The other thing that I've seen some people do is, if for example, that when the employee is not signed off on a goal or something like that, and they haven't gone through and clicked that checkbox to force it through to the next step or anything, you can run audits against that data to see if there has been a goal that's not been approved by the employee for X amount of time. If you don't have it in the process flow right now, you can obviously change it within that activity node to say that after X amount of time it will automatically approve or decline or whatever. I've seen other people who actually built a separate flow to audit against it, and then if it wasn't signed off and it was a certain kind, there would be a separate process flow that could run to automatically flip that flag then to say, yep, it's been approved, and move it forward. So there's a couple things that you can do with it on the flow side, out of the box, or with the delivered flows, as well as creating some custom flows to update some of that data.
And something else I just thought of, the goal creation process, for example, the employee can suggest, or the manager or request, the manager can suggest. We got rid of, instead of using the manager suggesting, we use manager create, which is really an administrative function, and it becomes active immediately. But with the flow and the shortened time frame, we didn't want the goals going back and forth. So we did want the manager to approve anything that the employee was asking for. But we figured the managers knew what goals should be, and so when they create it, it just was active immediately. So there's a couple ways around you can embed administrative functions to kind of skip some of that back and forth as well.
Yeah, we did the same thing for the future goals section,
Yes.
only during the appraisal process. Whenever a manager creates a goal during that time, it's automatically approved. So you don't have to wait for the employee to get back to you to finalize that appraisal.
Accept it.
Exactly.
Perfect.
I do have a comment here from one of our attendees that the newer version, specifically 11.0.0.32, allows you to turn off the entire acknowledgement.
Wow.
So So is that nice? You like that?
Fantastic. Yeah, we're up to 110026 right now, so I'm very excited about that.
All right, I think that's all the questions that we have.